Today, joining us listening online will be Seal Beach Mayor Joe Kalmick, and co-hosting with me here online will be Mayor of Los Alamitos, Mark Churko.
Hello, and I'd like to thank Assemblywoman Quirk Silva for joining us today.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We're really blessed to have Assemblywoman Quirk Silva join us from the 65th Assembly District. And she's a lifelong resident of the city of Fullerton. She's grown up there and has served since 2004 on the city council and also as a member of the state assembly, and grew up in a big family. And we're just really glad to have you here today. And we'd like to just ask you to give yourself a little introduction and then tell us about what are the things that you're really focusing on initially as a member of the assembly. What are you guys working on right now?
Well, good afternoon to everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to Mayor Mark Churko and Mayor John Pete. I am not only assembly member, but I have been a classroom teacher for 30 years, teaching mostly the grades of 3rd and 4th and 5th grade, but so this is kind of a little second chapter of my life. But right now, as we've moved through the pandemic, and for many of us who might have thought it might have been a 1 month, 2 month, none of us would have thought that 16 months later, we would still be talking about COVID and pandemic, but we certainly are. I think one of the most pressing issues, certainly I'm the chair of the Arts and Entertainment Committee of the state of California. And under that committee, we also work on tourism, gaming, motion pictures, technology. It's a very vast committee, and under that committee, of course, with entertainment would be our theme parks. So I have been working very tirelessly on our bill AB 420, which was to open theme parks in a swifter manner. We're very pleased. As some of you know, Disney is now opening their doors, Knott's Berry Farm. And for some of you who, as I did when I was in high school, worked at Disneyland at Stage Door Cafe. Did either of you, Mayor Pete or Churko?
No.
But many of our residents have worked there as, young high schoolers to actually make careers of those. And that's actually about 20,000 individuals that work in those two theme parks. Certainly doesn't count the retail, the hospitality that surround those theme parks. So finally, desperately getting an indication that reopening can start to happen is definitely good news. We know it's not, the capacity is going to be reduced, still many safety precautions, but at least the doors are open. And hopefully with more and more people getting the vaccine, we'll continue to see the capacity go up, because we know that many people are waiting to get into these parks and so forth. In addition to that, I'm focusing also the next area that we were having quite a bit of difficulty getting an opening green light was with private events and weddings. So for some of you, again, I have 2 daughters, 30 and 31, and some of their friends have put their weddings on hold from last summer, and even thinking they might have had to do that again this summer. But thank goodness for private events, outdoor weddings, and now even indoor, we've been given the green light. Still, again, safety precautions need to be taken, but at least they can schedule not only weddings, but anniversaries and all the things we do as families. And so we had to work quite a bit there. We are currently working very hard with the Motion Picture Association and actors, with the recording labels, the actors, in some legislation that we're trying to get them on the same page with. So I spend my days kind of negotiating that. But the second major topic, of course, that many of us have been very, very concerned with in Orange County, but across the state, it's actually in a poll, the #1 issue that Californians are very concerned with, and that's homelessness. As we know, some cities have been impacted more than others. In my district, the district that I have covers Fullerton, Buena Park, West Anaheim, La Palma, and Cypress. And so some have much more of numbers in their cities, but we certainly all want to see some kind of resolution here. So everything from working towards focusing on mental health. I have a bill now that is supported by the Mental Health Coalition that would say that if somebody is suffering from an addiction and mental health, a co-occurring condition, that mental health dollars or MHS funds can be used for to support that individual. Some of you who may not have been interfacing with an individual that's really suffering, many times we know that it's not just the mental health, it's also the addiction. Not 100% does it go together, but sometimes then they're diverted to go to an addiction specialist and now come to mental health, and we need to treat that as a holistic way so this person is not navigating through Orange County system. So I'm happy to move that forward. But those are just a few things. Housing, like I said, getting people back to work, getting kids back to school. I want to give a big shout out and cheer to Los Alamitos, as we know that you have led in this area. I'm a teacher from Fullerton Elementary, and my husband teaches at Fullerton Elementary, and they have been back since October. So we know this can be done. So we're out there rooting for kids to be back in school face to face, people back working, and just doing what we can to get people vaccines so they feel confident and safe.
Great. Mayor Turco.
Sure. Assemblywoman Quirk Silva, would you provide us with an overview of the, I think, John, you covered the first question. Let me move on to the second, excuse me. Given the nationwide pause on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, there's less options now. There's no single dose option available for getting vaccinated. So what can you tell us that the legislature is doing to ensure that residents have access to enough vaccines?
Well, I know that the Johnson & Johnson, if you want to say batch of vaccines, was a small percentage of the total vaccines that have been coming to the state. So even though there is a little bit of a lag as those are now put on hold, there is quite a bit of effort from the county to make sure they're starting to get into, of course, we have the supersized pods, whether it's the Disney or the convention center, but it's really getting into those smaller communities, whether it's the community centers, the clinics, even schools. There's been a lot of success doing that with a coalition of health agencies. So we know 3-to-1, our Latino neighbors and friends have not only been hit hard with deaths of COVID, but also with getting COVID. And we also know that many of them are frontline workers. So getting those vaccines into that neighborhood health clinic is essential. And it's starting to show in certain zip codes that once a neighbor or family member or friend get it, they're more likely to trust the vaccine and do that. But those smaller vaccine sites, I think, really are the key.
And if we could follow up on that, I think with the pausing of Johnson & Johnson, it might have created a little hesitancy in some communities. And so just wanted to know what we're doing to help educate those communities to, of the importance of the vaccine and to make them feel comfortable.
Well, again, looking at the data is always where we want to focus. And although there were, I believe, 6 individuals that really showed signs as far as blood clots, when you look at the numbers across the board, it's extremely small percentage. So over and over, we're hearing, it's safe. Let's do this. But I know Johnson & Johnson is doing their due diligence as far as a corporation and company to make sure they can address this. But I think one of the things we always have to weigh is particularly with individuals with chronic conditions, which we know, whether it's obesity or diabetes or hypertension, you can be very much at risk to actually, even though our numbers have gone way down in Orange County, there are still people dying. So we have to kind of balance out. Vaccine, is it the exact one I want? My advice is get the vaccine that you can as quickly as you can.
One thing that we've heard about in the news recently and concern from some residents as well is the issue of a vaccine passport. What can you tell us, or what light can you shed on what the governor and state legislature are saying about any sort of mandate or passport?
I think, again, that might have been something that somebody might have used in reference to maybe getting into a theme park or getting into a traveling particularly, but it's really been very much misconstrued. I haven't heard or seen any legislation, any type of even example of that. I know I went out on a tour just last week to Dignity Health complex right fairly close to you at the Dominguez Hills campus, and we're with a Home of the Galaxy, and we were talking to the major AE&G who are in the business of getting people through their doors into the seats to enjoy some type of entertainment, and they particularly specified they already have processes for temperature taking and so forth, but to actually see some type of immunization record, that's not something that would be practical. So right now, I really haven't seen any efforts for this to really come to fruition. But if in fact that is something that comes down, I will make sure we let you know, because I think the biggest effort is let's just get vaccinated and get back to work and get back to school.
Yep. All right. You mentioned your role as the chair of the Committee on Tourism, Sports, and Entertainment Industries. Could you talk a little bit more about Assembly Bill 420 and what, give us any more details about what you're doing to get the tourism industry going?
Yeah, so that bill we presented in January, and it was our effort to work with the governor's team directly and the theme parks, not only in Orange County, but of course, Universal Studios, Magic Mountain, SeaWorld, others, to say these groups of business people know how to move people through their parks. The last thing they want is a breakout or a super spreader event, and to really work with criteria that was going to allow them to open and not, in essence, keep them. Initially the numbers were so strict that it could take even close to a year from now. So I think that there were finally the numbers started to go down. I think the pressure, to be honest, of this bill really put the governor's office to work, and we were able to get a resolution that now we're even talking about possibly opening, many areas in June. So part of it was, again, I'll take credit where we can. We pushed the bill forward with bipartisan. My vice chair on that committee is Assemblymember Suzette Valderas, Republican, and we work side by side on that. So, a lot of times we spend talking about how there's breakdown in government, and there is, but there's also really good examples of people working closely together to get our state moving forward.
Yeah, you mentioned the June 15th lifting of the COVID restrictions that the governor's announced. What specifically does this mean for residents and businesses who've been living under the colored tier system for more than a year? And is the state going to be creating a new system to determine appropriate levels of activity and engagement, or will everyone get to operate as they see fit?
Well, That I will be completely honest. We do not have the quote blueprint for it yet. We, as assembly members, sometimes get news at the same time you do as a press conference. So we're always a little bit tentative to remark as we don't have it in front of us. I know that was stated as at a press conference, but I'm believing from what I've concurred on this is, that the numbers are going to be down far enough where, still with face masks, things like that, that there would be much more freedom to open. But I don't want to be quoted because I don't have the blueprint in front. But as soon as we get more information, we'll let you know.
Great, thank you. Next question would be, what resources will the state be able to provide to help residents and business recover from the impact of the pandemic? We know there's a lot of resources been approved by the federal government. What's the state's role going to be?
Well, over the last several months, there's been between federal and state various, as you know, loans, PPE loans, but also grants. The latest grants are up to $25,000 for small businesses. And I work directly on that package, trying to make sure that what we saw in some of the first rounds of loans that were very cumbersome, very lengthy, and we saw that many people really were not able to attain funds. So there are the California Grant for Small Business and Nonprofits Fund, and they are now into round 6 of this. And this is on our website. But the other thing I do want to highlight is even before the pandemic, there were through the Office of GoBiz, and that's GOBIZ, and that's the governor's office of GoBiz. There are several programs, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's small business loans, even before, and all of those funds have not been drawn down. So there's still opportunities. If there's business owners out there that have been really, hey, I tried, I got shut out, and believe me, that happens on all this technology, please call our office. I'm really proud to say that my team has been becoming experts in 2 or 3 things. Sadly, the EDD, we know that has been extremely frustrating for many of our constituents, particularly the part where their accounts have been frozen. I cannot say we have a wand in that, but we have been able to get some resolutions on some cases. So please call for EDD support, but also support if you're having a hard time on the grant applications. And we have several other resources on our website.
Great.
So schools, and Los Alamitos and Fullerton and other school districts have reopened, at least partially. Obviously, reopening fully for the fall school year is critical for a number of reasons. Right now, individual school districts are making decisions on when and how to reopen. As a member of the Education Committee, what will you and the committee be doing to help ensure schools are ready and able to open for the fall school year?
Well, I believe, again, coming from a press conference, that the governor has stated that schools should plan to resume in person, face-to-face, full-time. And I 100% believe that. Again, as a classroom teacher, I certainly want to see teachers safe, but I know that face-to-face is definitely makes a huge difference for our students. But also now that vaccines are available, we have to get kids back to school. With that, as you know, there's been many federal funds coming down for schools to accept and use for whether it's a PPE, whether it's reinventing how the spacing in classroom, and some of those requirements may even be changed. I was just on a call with a Cal State chancellor of all the CSUs, but Cal State Fullerton is the largest of the CSUs in Fullerton. Go Titans. And we are looking, and he is looking to have a very robust coming back to campus. The same thing with the community colleges. course, you host Cypress, one of the most acclaimed campuses in Orange County. And so we want to see those students back on campus. We want to see them engaged. And we know that some of them have really suffered. I don't think that's too extreme of a word, being away, distance learning, but even resource wise. So we're continuing to look at ways to reinvest so those resources can get back to the campuses and directly to the students.
Thank you. And that's a perfect segue to the next question. We were wondering about the, how are we going to help those students that have fallen behind for whatever reason it is, catch up as they move forward, so that there isn't that what you may have heard of as a lost year. Or
Learning
like
loss.
Learning loss, yes.
That is, well, first of all, there are bills going through. One just passed the state assembly on learning loss, focusing just on that. So whether it's additional after school funds, whether it's one-to-one type of tutoring funds, things like that, there will be that. But probably the hardest thing I think educators are going to face is the students that were already in disadvantaged communities, already behind. You add this year of pandemic where some students haven't even been to campus, depending on their district. And we may see a very critical time for families. So it's going to be hard to make up something that you've lost, but I do think it could be an opportunity to relook at some of the ways we're teaching students that really have very difficult times. I know my husband teaches, I've seen him online, and even getting some of them, now they're in class, but even to turn on cameras, to connect. I mean, we've all been on Zooms where we've had connectivity issues. But I do also think after the pandemic, there is going to be a percentage of families who choose to continue online type of learning. And certainly that should be part of a choice that they have.
Thank you.
We've also seen recently a return to sports. Is this something that you supported, and why or why not?
Yes, and that's also under the jurisdiction of my committee. And we had an informational hearing on sports that not only included youth sports, community sports, adult sports, professional sports, even boxing, the UFCW, all of these types of sports. And yes, because again, getting students back to what they choose to engage in. And again, whether it's sports or music or theater or drama, whatever it is that they do, we know that that's how they stay engaged. But we also know it's life and death, because sadly, for some students who particularly it's their junior or senior year and they have not been able to play, we've seen some very poor outcomes and even suicides, and we have to get these kids back to playing. And so we again worked under that same umbrella that we did with the theme park bill, with the private events and the sports, to really push our not only the governor's office but the Department of Health to look at. I mean, even when the cheerleaders were the guys can play sports, but not the cheerleaders. No, that's not going to happen. So we were happy to see a little backtracking there, but don't mess around with the moms of cheerleaders.
All right. Yeah, I know our youth sports programs are getting started, and it's just added there's so much energy and enthusiasm around the sports. So that's great to see that happening. I'd like to go back. You mentioned earlier the EDD and the unemployment agency, and offering to help people. Looking at the broader picture, though, is this something that's going to be able to work itself out in the near term, or is this a long-term issue to get through the backlog and maybe look at reforming some of the processes?
Well, I think all of those, I mean, we definitely are going to have to reform some of the processes that we saw completely break down. One being technology, part of the EDD system. We know that whether it's DMV or EDD, we are still using what some would call very archaic technology systems, and that contributed to some of this. And it wasn't just the pandemic. The problem was there before and should have been worked on. But it is the same thing with some of our California major systems, where it's a CSU system. We're still using technology, even though we're the home of Silicon. We have to get updated much quicker. But you see how quickly technology changes from, iPads to within almost a year, some technology is old. So that's one of the issues. The second was, to be honest, on the banking partner that distributed the debit cards. And that has been a very kind of a lot of finger pointing between Bank of America and this state, saying, well, it was their fault or their fault. And this simply is keeping people in a holding pattern. And that has been the hardest thing, is to if you want to say, lock these accounts that have been frozen. But the other part of it is also the fraud that we saw in that, just so many bad actors, whether it was the prison, but also individuals in our community claiming EDD, using identity. So we often host as an office senior scams, and more in those, we have to talk about things like cybersecurity. We have to talk about fraud. A lot of you are probably now seeing on your phones things like, pick up your Amazon package here. Those are all ways to get your information, and they are becoming quicker, faster than we can even imagine. Everything from somebody knocking on your door to say, oh yeah, I just hear from Edison and let me check your, box. And so it's just always being very much aware that not everybody has your best interest.
Thank you.
John, I think you've got the next question about Cypress and its housing element.
Yes. So you mentioned housing earlier, and it's all the cities in California are dealing with updating their housing element, and just wonder what advice you could give to cities as we struggle finding that space to plan for those additional units, and dealing with the concern that the community has regarding some of the impacts of traffic and those sorts of things.
Well, housing as a topic across the state of California is, again, one of the most complex issues. So we go from, first of all, we have not been building. So as production goes, we're not building. And that, of course, drives up prices because you have less housing available. So the average single family home in Orange County is about $750,000, which locks out a lot of our young people that we're educating in our CSUs and our universities that we need to have employed here in Orange County, having to drive. Because of the pandemic, one of the bright spots is, if you want to say, is exactly what we're doing now, which is Zoom. And so we have seen for the first time kind of, a lot of people say, an exodus to Texas, but really, in fact, we've seen an exodus. Like Fresno is one of the hottest housing markets, or the Inland Valley. So it doesn't really solve our issue in Orange County, because when you talk about the housing element, you're talking about the RENA numbers. And for most people down your block, then it's like, what are the RENA numbers? But the RENA numbers mean that a Metropolitan Planning Organization, SCAG, puts forward numbers that each city should attain. Now, I don't even know if there are any cities that have ever attained any of these numbers, actually, but they're a housing goal. And most cities become very upset or even angry about them because they seem like such a large number that almost anybody would become very frustrated by. But I think the whole point is to try to look at what each city can do within the context of their city. And for some of that, that is going to be to look at, are there any possible ways within your market rate housing to build some affordable units? Are there any ways in the more impacted cities like Fullerton has built an illumination, it's called the Illumination Foundation, and it's a recuperative care for homeless individuals. So if each city does something and what they can within their area, I think we have much more capacity, not to meet the goals because we're going to fall short, but to at least start to do something. Our issue becomes when some cities do nothing towards those goals, then it puts the pressure on other cities. So I guess my biggest statement would be is if everybody's city did something to address homelessness and every city did something to address some affordability, that would go a long way. It's not going to solve every issue, but it's a step in the right direction.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned, housing affordability and the supply of sufficient housing is certainly an issue, but one of the issues that comes up a lot in our cities is our residents' concern about loss of local control, in particular in relation to some of the bills that would redo our zoning laws, would remove single family zoning, for example, including from neighborhoods which are currently solely single family zoned, and potentially change the nature of our neighborhoods and neighborhoods where residents have lived for decades. Understanding there's a housing affordability issue, but what can you tell us and residents who are concerned about potential loss of local control about this issue?
I think that is a concern. I mean, I know before I went to the state assembly, I was a local council member for 8 years. So I understand whether it's a school district or a city council, that you want to be able to have the best information you have at your fingertips to make the best decisions, and you're the most equipped to make those. On the other hand, you kind of get that carrot and stick scenario where when there's sometimes just no effort for compliance, no effort to address what we see as a growing housing issue, a growing homeless issue, then you will get bills that will come in that seem either overly aggressive, taking local control away, and then it's up to us to vote to get those out. I believe the bill you're talking about is SB 9, and it came up last year. It did not get out, and I'm going to expect that there'll be still a very rigorous debate. I certainly will look at it seriously, as I'm hearing, and this is why these conversations are extremely beneficial. I was on a League of Cities call related to this bill. So I have been given the very much firsthand information that you and your colleagues are concerned, and I will make an extra effort to really look at it. One of the things we've learned is that if you can't stop a bill that seems really out of line, we can try to amend the bill to take some of the more egregious parts of it. And yes, I'm a Democrat, I know, and some people, we've become so much where, you're a Democrat or Republican. Are there any ways to come together? There are, but we have to make an effort to do that. But what I would say is, out of the Democrats in the state of California, there is a growing number of what we call business moderate Democrats, and we are there. This is what I'll say. Some of these bills that we get, and they're coming at us under all umbrellas, and this is no disrespect, but if you're a Republican and you're in the minority house, and this is in the state, not the federal government, then it's easy just to say no. And most of the time, the answer is no to every. If you're a progressive Democrat, like very, very progressive, then it's really easy just to say yes. So you've got the two bookends. Yes, no for Republicans, yes for progressive Democrats, but it's the middle, which is a growing number of moderate Democrats that are really trying to work with the policy. And it is not easy because we kind of get it from both sides. So I do my best to kind of think about what it was like when I was on council, when I was the only Democrat many times for the entire 8 years. One time there were 2 Democrats, but in 8 years that I was on council, and I had to work with my Republican colleagues to get work done. Many times I was worked and we did incredible things. I was named mayor twice by my Republican colleagues. And it was because we worked on how do we do the best we can for the city? And that's the same that I feel at the state. How do I do the best I can, especially in these incredibly polarizing times? And since 2004, when I started city council to now, it has just become, and John, you'll know that we've worked together over years, where you used to be able to sit down and say, okay, I don't agree with that, but what else can we talk about? Now with, social media, I mean, literally I voted on a bill last week and I'm in housing, and I'm getting flyers and social media posts, and even on my own personal Facebook, that are pretty intense. So I am hoping that as we come out of this COVID and pandemic and get back to face, that we could all start to look at how do we become neighbors again? How do we become community members, and not how do we become parties, Republican and Democrat? Let's just become good neighbors that are cheering on our soccer kids, because kids on a team aren't Republicans and Democrats. I hope they're kids playing a game, right? So I think there's a lot for us to learn from kids.
Right. And so I'm going to deviate a little from the script because you raise a really important point. And, we have worked well together over the past 6 or 7 years. And Mayor Churko and I were talking before the meeting started that we are very blessed to have yourself and State Senator Nguyen, who are moderate and focus on solutions and are able and willing to work with us. So we greatly appreciate that position. I want to compliment you. The letter that you and a number of other members of the Assembly sent, encouraging business growth and development as the solution to the need for revenues, was greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Mark, why don't you take question 14?
Sure. So homelessness, I mean, this is something you've touched on a couple of times already. Is there anything else you can tell us about what you're working on related to homelessness, bringing additional resources to the counties and cities to address these challenges? I think you're familiar with the North Orange County SPA and the significant number of shelter beds there providing shelter for people in need. What is the state doing to create more permanent supportive housing?
Well, I spend almost every day on one call or another or conversation. I just got off a call, matter of fact, a short while ago about our state property that is in Orange County, which is the Fairview Development Center, and it's 118 acres. And even that property is not to say, hey, let's put all our homeless people there, but can we use 118 acres of state land to start to look at some kind of visionary way where that land is not being used to that capacity today? So 2-3 years ago, the governor's team and I worked with me to put in at least an assessment of that land. So that assessment of that land is happening right now, and it'll be finished in about a month or so. But that's just one. The other is working on not only last week we had a meeting with Anaheim, and because I represent West Anaheim, and the Salvation Army and the state, actually the state officials, which I was able to get on because their project is taking so long. And we were talking about tax credits. And as you know, the way some of these projects are funded that work with the developer is through tax credits. So looking at a bill for tax credits. So almost everything that we talk about, making sure any funding that is coming down from the state that the locals know. So for example, Stanton, they were the only city in Orange County to be awarded the project home key funds. And that's actually to take an existing motel and turn it into permanent supportive housing. And they had 2 awards. And I was really excited for them. That's part of our city. We helped them work with that. But then we found out, well, no other cities in Orange County applied. So that is state. So you don't want to leave state money on the table if there's opportunity. Now, not every city has a hotel that might fit the bill, but certainly looking at what is available and applying, because there's, if we don't take the money in Orange County, somebody else is going to get it. And these are state dollars that can either match local or even pay for the entire project. So really making sure that we know what's out there. Like we said, even with the grants for businesses, knowing that the rounds are coming up, knowing that people should apply. So we really take that very seriously.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, we have 3 minutes left in our time, and so just wanted to see if you had any closing comments that you'd like to make. We greatly appreciate you taking the time. We know your time is very valuable and busy, and so we really appreciate you coming to join us today.
Well, I look forward to getting face to face because it's been a very long time, and we will be starting to host our quote. You remember I do the coffee and conversations. We'll probably do them outdoors at a park, but start to schedule those for each city, August, September, October, just to get back in. There are small openings that we're attending, ribbon cutting. So we are starting to feel like you said, kids are starting to play again, parents are out. But certainly it's not only my pleasure, but my honor to serve this district. And we're only a phone call away or an email away. And again, even though I don't represent Los Alamitos, it's the partnering city to Cypress. So your issues are important to us, and please stay in contact. And to any of the constituents out there, please contact our office. We have a team now that is becoming very expert-like in solving cases that aren't easy to solve. I'll just tell you one restaurant owner in Fullerton who owns 2 restaurants in the historic Villa del Sol. We were able to help him with both of those restaurants. We were able to help a preschool teacher who had not had her EDD since last year. It took probably 15 calls, but we were able to finally get her. So that's what we do, and we're happy to be of service. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks again for joining us, for your expertise and being willing to listen to the residents of West Orange County. Just an announcement that our next town hall will be May 6th during the lunch hour, and will feature Assemblywoman Janet Nguyen. Our next speaker has served at the county, state assembly, and state senate levels of government. So please join us to hear her unique perspective as well. Thanks again.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.